theme of first movement. To maintain the unity of the piece and convey a different mood for each theme, McDowell continues to develop the second theme of the first movement by utilizing the augmentation of dotted rhythms from the first theme. A similar rhythmic pattern occurs throughout the piece. In the development section of the first movement, for example, McDowell uses the rhythm to express the textural exchange between the right and left hands. In some instances, McDowell compressed the rhythm by using rhythmic alteration. An example is the theme in the A section of the second movement. Note that the three-note motif is also displayed here. In addition, McDowell uses this rhythmic pattern repeatedly in the exposition of the fourth movement. As mentioned earlier, the three-note motif is developed into different themes throughout the piece. Here are more examples. In this example, the Scotch snap rhythm is turned into grace notes, and ascending three-note scale is displayed with a different rhythmic pattern and articulation. McDowell developed the three-note ascending scale into a four-note scale in the following measure. The three-note motif can arguably be considered part of the A theme in the third movement. However, as we saw earlier, changing the order of the pitches is one of the techniques McDowell uses. Third movement theme. First theme of the first movement. Here is another example of how McDowell develops the three-note motif and the introduction theme into a new theme. He turns the Scotch snap rhythm to grace notes and expands the dotted rhythms. McDowell reminds us of the tragic motif in the triumphant last movement when he uses the minor mode. Here is an example from the exposition of the movement. The theme also returns in the recapitulation. Augmentation of the dotted rhythm is also seen here. In addition to thematic transformation, the full 8-measure introduction theme recurs in the middle of the development section of the first movement and at the end of the last movement. The occurrences of the theme might relate to the romantic hero. The first occurrence of the theme has a tragic and majestic quality. The hero faces obstacles. The second occurrence displays the theme in E minor and in a lower register, which suggests the hero's sorrow and a sense of loss. The last appearance of the theme demonstrates a calm feeling as the hero overcomes the obstacles. Here's the first occurrence of the theme. The second occurrence. And the last occurrence. Moreover, McDowell employs similar transitional materials in other movements to perhaps recall the memory of the past. For example, here is the transition in the introduction to the first theme of the first movement, compared with the transition to the coda in the final movement. Compared with the last movement. The other instances are the transition to the closing material in the exposition of the first movement, and the transition to the development in the last movement. Here is another example, the transition to C minor in the development of the first movement. and the transition to the return of the theme in C minor in the third movement. The first movement is typical of a sonata form in G minor with a coda, as you can see on the screen. However, the retransition emerges with a strong D in the bass, although it is not a pedal point. The movement ends with the three-note tragic motif, similar to the way the piece starts. The second movement is a scherzo in a rounded binary form, ABA, in B-flat major. It is interesting that each section has its own ABA pattern. Theme 1, 2, 1 in the A section. Theme 3, 4, 3 in the B section. And the return of the A section. The movement ends with an extension that suggests a soft ending and then surprises us with a grand ending. The third movement utilizes dotted rhythms as a marche funèbre, funeral march, which recalls the Scotch snap rhythms and the tragic poetry and motive. The movement is a rounded binary form, ABA, in C minor. It ends by fading the music away to a very quiet quadruple piano. In the form of a sonata rondo in G major, the final movement begins with an energetic, proud theme, although it presents the theme as a reminiscence of the tragic motif. It is fascinating that the exposition ends with an interruption, which suggests the hero's struggles. The development is in a flat 6 or E flat major. It features the theme of this movement in a distant key with a complete change of mood that is lyrical, dreamy, and celestial. The recapitulation of this movement is remarkable. Instead of returning with the A theme, McDowell chooses to feature the B theme, although in the minor dominant. The piece ends as it rises in pitch, with the use of an imperfect, authentic cadence. The piece ends triumphantly. After investigating McDowell's biography and examining the piece in detail in terms of thematic development and form, I came back to my first few questions. According to John F. Port, this sonata is considered, quote, less successful as a work of art than his three later sonatas, end quote. However, my first impression of the piece was positive, and I thought the piece was successfully written. Even if this sonata is less successful than his later sonatas, I still believe McDowell's works should be a part of the established canon in piano repertoire. I hope you enjoy the performance of the Sonata Tragica in the second half. Thank you.